North America is very big, and there is a huge energy wealth that is spread out over it. It was like a safety button for the US economy because it had oil, natural gas, and minerals. In Canada, things will be interesting, but the people there would pay less than half of the tax. Am I going to charge the European Union extra for goods? Of course. Not long ago, US President Donald Trump put taxes on all Canadian goods and then took them off. Recently, though, things have been different. Protectionist taxes from the US have made Canada turn its attention to markets in Europe and Asia. What does this change mean for the US? Could the loss of America's biggest energy source, next door, throw off the balance of power in the world? Canada's new product pacts with the EU and Asia are a huge change in the way the world trades. If cheap heavy oil, lots of natural gas, and important minerals go to Asian or European ports instead of the US, could this hurt Washington's ability to support jobs, growth, and strategic energy, or is the link between Canada and the US still necessary? Once we know the answers to these questions, we can look at what Canada's energy change means for the rest of the world. In the past few years, the world's energy markets have changed a lot because it has a lot of oil and natural gas. Canada is at the center of these changes. Trade in energy is very important for both countries' budgets, especially trade with the US. Rates, and that seems to be going along very quickly. A lot of countries, not just Canada and Mexico, have been very mean to us. After a 1-month break, US President Donald Trump has said that next week he will put a 25% tax on goods from Canada. Because of this, Canada is looking to the EU and Asia as new markets for its energy exports. Canada is the biggest place for the US to get energy from and the biggest place for the US to send energy to, after Mexico. When Canada and the US trade with each other, energy is an important deal. The United States makes more oil and gas than any other country, but it depends more and more on Canada to give much needed heavy crude oil to refineries and keep power going to homes and businesses. More than half of the oil that the US buys comes from OPEC countries. The rise in Canadian imports is a key factor in making the US less dependent on those countries. On the other hand, most of the natural gas that comes into the US comes from Canada. Canada is also the US's main source of energy and important minerals like uranium. This makes Canada an important partner for the US's energy security and price stability. So why does Canada want to sell its goods in the EU and Asia? President Trump's threat to put 25% tariffs on Canadian goods and 10% tariffs on Canadian oil has messed up one of the biggest and closest free trade zones in the world. Americans' sudden hostility toward Canada has surprised officials in that country, but it has also made people more eager for Canada to connect with the rest of the world. As part of its plan to diversify its trade, Canada wants to boost its exports to countries other than the US by 50% by 2025. In this situation, the markets in the European Union and Asia have a lot of promise for Canada. The European Union has one of the biggest economies in the world, and Canada trades with it more than any other country. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, between Canada and the European Union gives Canadian businesses easier entry to the EU and great growth opportunities in the EU. People who follow trade say that Canada's comprehensive trade deal with the European Union is the best chance for Canadian companies to become less reliant on the US market. A deal called the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement was made between Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and EU leaders in 2016. After a year, the temporary application for full ratification was made, and it is still waiting to be heard. Tariffs on almost all goods moving across the Atlantic were taken away by the deal. It also includes a lot of services and tries to make rules more consistent by consulting on a regular basis. European and Canadian companies can bid on contracts at all levels of government in Canada and the 27 member states of the European Union. This gives Canadian companies access to a market that could be worth $3.3 trillion. Part of the trouble is that some people in Europe are against the agreement, which has made it take longer to be ratified. Because different countries are in charge of different parts of CETA, it needs to be approved by all EU member states. 10 countries such as Ireland, Poland, and Italy have not signed yet. In each country, people have different complaints about the deal. Some critics say that the way that CETA handles disagreements gives businesses too much power. Some people are worried that the agreement will weaken national sovereignty, make food safety standards less strict, and include local agricultural goods. Some national parliaments didn't see approval as important, which also played a part. Brexit has been another thing that has made things harder. The UK was one of the main supporters of CETA and one of the first countries in the EU to officially sign it. Both Canada and the UK have decided to follow the terms of CETA until a trade deal between the two countries is made. This is because the UK is no longer part of the bloc. It is said that Canada and the EU need to work even harder to finish the deal and get more companies to take advantage of it because US President Donald Trump has threatened a trade war. So, what would happen to the US if Canada started sending energy to the EU and the EU? And markets in Asia? It might be bad for the United States in some ways. To begin, the United States might not be able to get as much cheap and secure energy as it does now. This could make energy more expensive and make it less certain that there will be enough energy to go around. United States may not be able to get as good of deals in energy trade with Canada because it is expanding into more countries. Canada's attempts to expand the types of energy it exports have led to new deals with the US and other countries over goods. So, how can Canada make a new deal with the US and other countries to trade goods? The Canadian economy needs an immediate, strong, and well thought out reaction to the threat of US tariffs. Washington needs to know that Canada is an important part of America's path to energy and economic security. Focusing on key commodities can help a larger industrial revival in Canada. This can increase productivity, improve the country's GDP, encourage technical progress, bring in foreign and domestic investment in a number of key areas, and speed up investments in the country's resources. We would become very important to the US and a key part of its economic and energy policy if this happens. Putting more attention on certain goods could also boost Canada's industry and related services. This would help make sure that good environmental policies like methane capture and conservation help lower emissions at every stage of the value chain. A strategy based on resources does not have to be a strip and ship approach. Geographic diversity is also a more general need. The US's 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports from Canada and other countries show how important it is to quickly find new markets. Large-scale product projects would be less risky if resources were expanded. Canada would also be able to send more goods, materials, and energy to Asia and Europe. This could lead to more trade with many of the world's biggest and fastest growing nations over time. Washington already knows that Canada has a lot of good resources. The United States apparently understood how important resources are to its own interests when it decided to put a 10% tax on Canadian energy, but a 25% tariff on other goods. So, how does oil and gas from Canada help the US with its energy policies at home and abroad? Exports of oil, gas, and electricity from Canada help the US build up its energy reserves, lower energy costs for consumers, and support the US's goals of increasing energy exports to friends around the world. Because the North American energy grid is deeply connected to the South, trying to move away from Canada would be expensive and take a long time. The US wants to help Europe and close Asian countries become less reliant on less environmentally friendly energy sources, even though it is a net exporter of oil and natural gas. It also wants to meet its own growing energy needs. Even though the United States has a lot of stockpiles, they are being used up by data centers that use a lot of energy to power AI and other technologies. Through integrated pipelines and grids, stable energy generation in Canada can help the United States meet its energy needs. This would give the US a safety net so it could send oil and natural gas to friends around the world without raising gas prices for Americans. US attempts to become the world's main oil supplier could be slowed down by oil from Canada. Canada's share of importing crude oil into the United States has grown a lot, and now it makes up 24% of the US's oil usage. Pipelines bring heavy crude oil straight to refineries in the United States that are designed to process it. If these plants, mostly those in the Midwest, stopped using Canadian heavy crude, they would have to pay a lot to reform or get oil from other places. like Venezuela or the Middle East, which comes with political risks.